I've watched several hours worth of COPPA videos now, trying to figure out if anyone can answer the COPPA question truthfully and lawfully, and how the regulations might be complied with. It seems to me the best people to comply with the regulations are the viewers, because nobody else knows who the underage people are who are watching YouTube videos. And it would be best, it seems to me, if anyone is watching who's under 13, that they turn off ads, that they block them, or they go on YouTube Red, or get their parents to help them find a way to turn them off. The COPPA regulations are designed to keep underage people from being monitored and having their data collected by YouTube, so they shouldn't sign on without parental consent. But it can potentially shut down creators because AdSense revenue collected on their behalf with the information from those underage people is then collected by YouTube creators. So the best way to do it without loss of privacy of either the creator or the viewer, as far as I could see, would be to have the ads turned off by the only people who know whether they're underage or not. Other attempts have created a horrible mess to try to back engineer some way of determining who's underage watching YouTube videos. And we need to have a better way of doing it, it seems to me. Now, as to the question of whether anybody can comply with COPPA, I think, for my purposes, I might be able to answer the questions truthfully with some qualifiers. And it's an incredibly difficult task that's taken me a lot of work to try to figure out. The problem is that, first of all, COPPA has had the concept of videos being directed toward a certain audience. Well, many beginning creators, first of all, have virtually no audience, and they don't direct their content anywhere. The direction is done by YouTube through suggested videos, recommended videos, and by potential viewers who find a video through searches. And also through subscribers, but those are also chosen by the viewers, whether they want to subscribe or not, and whether they want to be notified of new uploads or not. So creators typically have very little control over who watches their videos. They would have to have a lot of marketing power outside of YouTube, or buy ads to advertise their videos, but then they'd have to pay more for the advertisements to bring in new viewers than they would get from the AdSense revenue generated by those viewers. It would be a losing proposition. They wouldn't actually make any money that would be available for seizure by the Federal Trade Commission. Anyone other than the creator, I think, is a false answer for a beginning YouTuber, for a lot of beginning YouTubers. There's a false assumption embedded in the COPPA question where they ask, is this made for kids? Well, initially, a lot of people, even authors who eventually went on to enormous success, make material for themselves. They say, I'm making this video because it's something I'm interested in, and there may be only a handful of all the billions or millions of potential viewers who'd actually want to see it. And there have been several stories like this. Or an author will say, well, nobody's going to like this character. Nobody's going to want to read this language or be interested in this fantasy world with these fantasy characters that I've made up, but I'll write it anyway, just for me. And of course, some of them eventually became incredibly successful stories. But initially, there is no concept of a defined demographic that an individual creator can target. And the idea of this defined demographic on the basis of age is highly problematic, and in the way that COPPA defines it, self-contradictory. They allow a certain set of subjects which they say are safe to address because they are traditionally adult. So if you make a video that's on a supposedly adult subject, you're okay. These are things that have to do with employment, politics, finances, buying a home, and so on. Property. And I guess my channel could have an exemption on that because I'm talking about property rights questions. But also, what about everybody else's property rights, particularly those of young people? This is the problem that I see, in that there is no such thing as I see it, as this traditionally adult distinction between adult life and child's lives based on employment and politics and other things. Children have also always been intricately part of politics. I mean, there's no way you can get elected as an American president unless you have children. So children have a big part in the political landscape. There are a handful of American presidents whose children died when they were born, or who didn't have children of their own, but they all pretty much adopted. And children are still extremely important in politics today because politics build their image based on how they interact with children. They kiss babies to make them look good. They can be ruined if they're supposedly had some inappropriate interactions with children, and so on. And now there's an entirely new economic reason for children to no longer be considered different from adults in an economic sense. And even COPPA's principles seem to recognize this, because they say we're defending the traditional distinction between adults and children. So they're defending something that, it seems to me by their language, they've already admitted no longer exists. This is because there are fewer barriers to entry to becoming a child star now. Potentially anybody can do this. And the biggest non-musical YouTube video in terms of views is Charlie Bit My Finger, which now, Bit My Finger Again, which now has 871 million views of nothing but one child biting the other kid's finger. That probably wouldn't have been possible before the advent of the internet. But now children can be economically competitive with adults. They can build large followings early in their lives, and the earlier in your life you build your following or make your money, the more valuable it is, because it could be invested and compounded over a longer span of your lifetime. So there's this age discrimination involved in saying that there's a fundamental difference between what children are interested in and how children live their lives versus adults, because children are now extremely competitive because we have this attention-based economy, and children are really good at getting attention. They have to be, or they'll starve and die. Okay? Now traditionally they've also had jobs. It was only in a very narrow window of recent history when North Americans, particularly Americans, urbanized. They no longer had to have a need for a large family to work the farm. And they also got rich enough that they could afford to not send their children out to work. That trend is now reversing for different reasons. The right to earn a living is constitutionally protected. So when you have this legislation that tries to assume that children aren't economic creatures, it seems to me that's a violation of their rights. And if you have an ad-based system, then, and that's the only way that children can make videos for each other, which is a highly desirable thing, it seems to me, then you've set it up so that you're denying children the right to earn a living. This is a potentially revolutionary thing today, because for the first time we could have combat between equals. The argument that people have made for years with advertising is that children have no cognitive defenses against it. To some extent it's true of adults too, I think, that if you crank up the volume of brainwashing, sooner or later everybody will crack. But we can have a system now where children make programming for children. So a child trying to convince another child of something is at least engaging in a battle that's not so unequal as it was in the past, where you have corporations with huge staffs and salaries and budgets and research done on how to successfully manipulate people, making all the programming for children. And those products that are embedded in the children's belief system and personality and consciousness can stay with them at least into middle life, if not beyond, and influence their buying decisions and their lives and their belief systems. So that's what I see with COPPA, in that you've got this way to have this artificial pipeline into somebody's brain, and so you can overwhelm their reason with all these pretty things, music and video or anime and all these other tools. But the main question, it seems to me, is what message are you putting in? That's what matters the most. If you're just doing something for the sake of making something pretty, or are you, I would argue in the case of Disney, instilling a certain cat eat cat mentality, in the case of The Lion King, or trying to say that it's okay to kill your parents in the case of The Lion King and Frozen. So in order to counter these influences, we need media literacy. And in order to have media literacy, you need to have people who looked at these things closely and can talk about them without having all their comments shut off because they're talking about something that was made for children. And we also need to have a non-segregated environment where you can hear from people who've witnessed children watching these movies or other video or other entertainment products, what they think the effects on the children are and how the children see them. The horrible thing about this is we got all these regulations being discussed in a platform where children are not supposed to be allowed onto it by all the people who aren't children. There's no input virtually of any of this as to how a child is affected and how children see these products. They're segregated. It's like putting somebody in an informational ghetto. We have to have some sort of way that people of different ages can communicate with each other in order to get media literacy and a healthy media environment for children and ultimately for everybody else, because everybody who starts out watching a product as a child gets older and retains the interest in their toys or other entertainment vehicles of childhood well beyond the time when they're officially children. Also, creators are being given no privacy protection from this, and the legislation isn't of much value in a world where there isn't privacy protection. The question isn't of much meaning to ask who's this being made for and where is it being sent when the creator has no control over who it's made for, who's it shown to, where it's sent, because there's such an enormous amount of privacy violation in terms of people taking the original creator's voice and face and speech perhaps and putting it into another video somewhere else where it can have a massively larger audience, which the creator knows nothing about in terms of demographics or even location. Much of the time it can be on an entirely different platform and possibly never found, especially with the upcoming changes in the regulations, because YouTube's saying, okay, if this is child directed, we turn off all the comments. Well, even with thousands or millions of views in a pirated location, it can take that much before anybody searching through the comments can find a clue to go back to the original creator and said, here's where your work's been copied and pasted somewhere else. So the privacy protection is focusing on the minimum infringement. The amount of privacy that viewers are losing is quite small compared to the amount that creators are losing, and which they have to have in order to know who their audience is. So it seems to me this is the sort of legislation that is brought in that's protectionist. It's brought in to defend a dying industry in a lot of ways. To defend the non-digital media, for one thing it seems to me, but also the work done by people who benefited from the traditional definition of what children were and what adults were and what valuable content was. It seems to me that play is absolutely essential to our demographic survival. There's this experiment done once where a man made a rodent utopia. He made the ultimate environment for mice where he provided for every possible material need and crowded them together to simulate what would happen in a city. And the mice all died within a few generations. They stopped breeding and socializing normally. And the same thing is happening to a certain extent with people. Once you take them off the farms where they have that huge financial incentive to have lots of children because they need the hands to work the fields, and you put them in the city, there's nothing to replace that. And they have fewer children, and they don't have enough to replace the population. So we have a critical youth shortage today. And youth is what's being legislated against by this privacy policy. In the experiments, it was thought, after watching the mice die out, that you might be able to substitute physical space by instead supplying creative and imaginative space. Give people enough ways to play, and then they might still be able to socialize and function normally. So the ability to substitute our present pay-to-play political system and develop a get paid for playing system is critical. We might not demographically survive without this, without a means of monetizing play that doesn't totally destroy people's privacy and that doesn't require on all this data collection. If you make a place attractive enough, you should be able to charge whatever you want for, within reason, for ads, because that's where the people are. It seems to me that there doesn't have to be such incredible information gathering with such degree of infringement of privacy, because if you have the audience, well, where else are they going to go? Where else the advertiser's going to go? If that's where the people are, don't you have to follow them? Now, there should be defense of other platforms available, but if they're all operating on COPPA, how are they going to compete properly? If you go to another platform and it says this is for non-commercial use only, like BitChute seems to say in its terms of service, how can you go use it? And also, if it's for only people 16 and over, then you got an even worse age gate problem than you have with YouTube, where people are making material that can be watched by children, but is being blocked from being watched by children. It's discrimination. And discrimination is prohibited, at least in principle, in YouTube's terms of service. It says you don't promote hatred against people based on certain qualities, one of which is age. So you can't say, okay, I'm going to make my video only for these people and profit from this system that's designed to oppress one group and keep one group from making a living at the expense of another, without essentially hating or at least discriminating against that group. So, as to whether I can really answer this question, well, I guess I can say no in terms of whether my video is made for children, because most adults can't even comprehend what I'm saying. Even singing is a lot of it incomprehensible to people. It requires a lot of explanation, and that might be simply because of the way people have been acclimatized to certain types of entertainment. So when they see something different, they don't know what to make of it. But I have had to build my audience from very small numbers and with vast amounts of my material being pirated. This makes its own age gate in a way, I think, because most people who find my material have to have a certain amount of skill to do it, and they may have found it several years after their initial exposure to it, so they're now that many years older by the time they find my channel. Though I guess I have a built-in age gate that way, but it's hardly the most desirable situation. And my whole purpose of doing my channel is to promote youth. I'm essentially making these videos for an audience that does not yet exist, and for a social situation that does not yet exist, which I'm trying to bring about. I want to make it possible for people to have access to the means of becoming young again because of our critical youth shortage in part. So I'm not really making my videos for a specific age bracket. I'm making for my videos for the betterment of society by changing the system we currently have, and I don't see anything in COPPA that is that forward-looking. I can say my videos aren't made for kids because they're not made for really anybody but me, or people who might start to see things a little bit more like I do. And they're not made for a particular age bracket because I'm making them for people who want to become younger again. So although I have my exemptions and protections, I have to speak out and I hope raise some awareness on all these problems with COPPA. Because if we can't monetize play, not just defining proper activity on the internet as these economic financial things, then we are not going to be able to have youth and young people in productive people that we need to maintain our society, our standard of living.